Welcome. This is going to cover the lecture material from Chapter 1 of the Brooker Introduction to Biology book, and it's also going to talk about diversity of life. So let's get going. So the first thing we're going to talk about are 12 principles of biology. So I'll give you some understanding about what that means. In particular, we're going to be talking about those 8 principles of life. So this is going to help you to understand what all living things are going to have in common, right? You can use this as a guide to say if this is living, it's going to have these principles in common. We'll also talk about levels of organization in this video as well. And then in future videos, we'll talk about the following items that are listed here. So biology is the study of life. I'm very familiar with this term, and I'm sure you've heard of this as well. So it is a Greek and Latin word, and because of that, it has these stem words here. So the first one is bio. So anytime you see something with the word bio in front of it, it tends to be related to living things. Think about going to the doctor's office. Usually if they have you swab your nose, let's say, you might have to throw it away in a red bag called a biohazard bag. I don't know if you remember seeing that. But basically this means that there is some type of living or some type of thing in here that may have life that may be damaging to us, right? We don't know if you're sick or anything like that. So because of that, we put it in this red biohazard bag, right? Bio life. You're seeing that tie there. And then LOGY, which is the study of. So there's tons of things known that end in LOGY. We have psychology, right? That's going to be the study of the mind. You have things like microbiology, of course. That's going to be the study of microbes and things we can't see. Sociology, zoology. There are tons of different logies out there. And because the study of life is so complex, this has been something we've been studying for millions of years. Because so many living things are there, we have such a wide variety and complex list of organisms that can be used to create such a broad field. And when we talk about life, make sure that you understand it's not just humans, right? We tend to be a little selfish here. We're also talking about things like plants, different types of animals, and then again, microbes. So some things that are really small are living, such as bacteria or fungi, but others, like a virus, is not really a living thing. And we'll have a few questions in class in which we can kind of dive into what a virus is and how it doesn't really fit into what a living thing is. So speaking of that, think about a marker, right? Think about a marker or a pen, a pencil, anything like that. Ask yourself if that marker, pen, or pencil is living. I really hope that you said no. Now that you're confident that marker, pen, or pencil is not living, ask yourself, how do you know that? Take a second to really try to think about why this is not a living thing. The answer is not, oh, it's not alive. The answer is, why is it not a living thing? Think about that and pause if you need to on the video. Okay, so as we go into some of these principles of biology, we're going to bring this marker back and we're going to talk about how we can use those principles to remind ourselves this marker is not a living thing. So as we dive into the 12 principles of biology, I want you to pay special attention to a comment that I have here at the very top. The first 8 of these 12 principles of biology are considered basic characteristics of life. So anything that is living, numbers 1 through 8, all living things must have all of these characteristics, 1 through 8. They can't have 1, 5, and 7. They have to have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that's very critical you keep in mind. So let's jump into the very first one that we see here on the list. And that is going to be cells are the simplest unit of life. So if you look at a cell, it's going to make up usually larger complex systems called organisms. Some organisms can be unicellular, like yeast. So yeast is something known as unicellular. It's going to consist of being one cell in size, but most organisms, like, a human, a fish, a dog, a cat, all those things are going to tend to be made up of multiple cells. Again, our little marker does not have any cells. Living organisms use energy. So we're going to get energy from outside sources. We're going to acquire that energy. Some of it is going to be, let's say, eating, right? We're going to eat our food. And when we eat our food, we eat food so that we can carry out some reactions in our body that are going to make molecules our cells can use. So this whole process is called metabolism. We'll discuss it. And then with animals, we tend to convert that food into energy using the cellular respiration process. In plants, that's known as photosynthesis. Living organisms interact with their environment, so they will grow or move depending on anything on the outside that tells them to grow or move. So an example would be a plant moving towards light. So if any plant moms or plant dads are there, if you take your plant and kind of block some of the window, your plant will actually start to grow towards the light source. So whatever the light is coming from, in this picture, the light is to the right and the plants are growing towards the right. They're trying to get closer. They're trying to move. You know, plants don't have feet, so they can't walk towards the light. They're growing. Think about if there happened to be a fire in the room. On the right side, I hope you would start moving to the left side. Our poor little pen or marker is just going to stay where the fire is, unfortunately. And even think about bugs. You turn the light on, a bug might try to hide from you, get away from the light. It's responding to that external stimuli. Living organisms maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis is just a synonym for maintaining the same or constant internal conditions, right? So you want your body temperature to stay the same. I know we have a lot of nursing majors, right? So I won't tell you what your body temperature is. I hope y'all will know if I see you. And if you have too high of a body temperature, then you get a fever. We know how damaging a fever could be. Also, there are conditions if your body temperature is too low, that could be known as something called hypothermia. Hypothermia is when your body gets too cold, and that's going to cause some damaging issues as well. Again, we're still in our top 8. The 5th one is living organisms grow and develop. So growth is going to be more, right? We're going from 1 cell, now we're going to 2 cells. Larger, you're taking a tiny cell, you're growing over time so that it's a little bit bigger. Development is where we start to get certain changes, right? So this is a little throwback Thursday picture of you. But we all kind of start off looking like a little kidney bean. And then eventually we develop. You get arms, legs, toes, nose, ears, eyes, those type of things. You develop over time. So the embryo is a great example of that. And then 6, we have genetic material. This genetic material is going to be basically our instructions. So for humans, we can focus on our DNA. We'll talk about that a lot. It's one of the macromolecules you have in your body, and through the mating process, I share my DNA, you share your DNA. We know how to make a baby human, right? Same thing. I want to make a penguin. What are the instructions for making a penguin? 7, populations of organisms evolve from one to the next. So we have these tiny changes, or known as mutations, that allow populations to move and adapt to the environment. An example is a giraffe, and we'll talk about that in the next video. And then finally, all species, past and present, are going to be related by some type of history. So it doesn't really matter about, like religious backgrounds about how we all got here. What we're saying is, when we're talking about organisms, there tends to be an organism found previously that has very similar characteristics. So an example, like I said, sorry, I didn't say it, but when we talk about the giraffe, we'll talk about how it used to kind of mirror something like a horse, but then over time it became a giraffe, with the telltale long neck that we know a giraffe to have. So these are not characteristics of life, so living things do not have to display this. And you'll see they're a little bit different than the first 8, but they're still principles of biology. So first one is structure determines function. So the shape of something relates to the function of it. Webbed feet help for swimming. If you're talking about a car, let's say you got a car, you got, new set of rims. The fact that the wheel is a circle helps the wheel to roll, right? Structure determines function. New properties of life emerge from complex interactions. So that means that individually, you have certain things in your body that can, Be a triangle, be a circle, be a square. But if they work together, they can have a very, very strong impact. It can be a mega shape. So although they're individual components, they're working together helps them have a new function. Vision is an excellent example of this because vision requires a lot of different players to play a role, and of course, that the output of it is being able to see. 11, biology is an experimental science. What does that mean? That means as scientists, if we have a question about something, we know how to be able to perform experiments to answer that question. And we'll talk all about what a hypothesis is and how can we test it. And then 12, biology affects our society. So as we advance in the field, this improves the quality of life. I mean, if this doesn't hit home right now, nothing else will, right? The vaccine development, all of the work we've done with the COVID-19 pandemic, this is all a result of science and the fact that it clearly shows biology does affect our day-to-day in our society. Okay, so again, I'm going to ask y'all that same question, and we'll probably do it in class if possible. What are 2 things this marker would actually need to do if we want it to be a living thing, right? What would this marker need to show? So let's talk about levels of organization. So this is a really nice schematic talking about this little parrot. We're going to start off with the smallest level of organization, which is an atom. We're going to go all the way down the line. You see how it goes numerically. And we're going to finally end up in a biosphere. So this is a really nice image. You see kind of the small macromolecule items that are 1 and 2. You start to see some cells at 3, tissues at 4, making a complete organ system at 5. And then finally, that's going to lead to an organism, right? 2 or more of that same organism population, a population in an ecosystem, which we'll talk about in a second, is going to be a community. Finally, that ecosystem, what does that mean? And then the biosphere. So all these are going to be items covered in the next few minutes. So levels of organization, atom. It's the smallest unit of an element. So here's where you think of an example. What's an example of an element or an atom you may have heard of? Let's go with carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, boron, gold. All of these are different types of elements. Molecules or macromolecules. So anytime you have multiple atoms together, right? I'm just going to do 2 of them together. Or multiple molecules, which are known as macromolecules, that is going to be what this category is for. So whenever you have multiple atoms together, that's a molecule. When you have multiple molecules together, that becomes a macromolecule, okay? So an example of a molecule, think about any formula you've heard of that contains more than one element. Easy one, right? A macromolecule, we just talked about one earlier. We said DNA. If you remember in the video, it was DNA, which is one of your genetic material types of macromolecules, genetic material. Cells. So let's take those macromolecules, let's put them in a circle, in a membrane-bound structure. We're going to get a cell. So you might have all different types of cells out there. I apologize. All different types of cells out there, right? Maybe you got a liver cell, maybe you got a lung cell. All these are going to be different types of cells that are going to be present. Next is tissue. So tissue are going to be when you have many cells of the same type. So like I just talked about, you got the liver, you got the lung. Anytime those cells come together to form that particular structure, they might be liver cells, they might be lung cells, they might be heart cells. All these are going to be known as tissues. It's many cells, get this, of the same type. They have to be the same type of cell. It has to be a lung cell. It has to be a liver cell. Organs, groups of 2 or more tissues. So this is an actual picture of a heart. All hearts do not look like this. But when you look at that heart actually has multiple different types of tissues. A good example is, the lung. We know about tons of organs, lung, kidney, heart, pancreas, all different types of organs. And if you look at them from a microscopic level, you're going to see there are more than one type of tissue. They kind of work together. So think about your lung. I don't know if you know the shape of a lung, but you have the bronchial tubes, which are like the big branches of your lung. Your lung kind of goes like this, your trachea, and then it branches off into your bronchial tubes, and then it has little smaller sacs called alveoli, right? That's going to be where you do gas exchange. All these are going to be different opportunities in different tissues that are found that help to make up the lung so that it can do what it needs to do, right? All these are going to be examples. All right, here we get a little on the macro scale, on the big scale. With an organism, this is a complete set of organ systems. So if we're talking about the same organism, this is known as a species, right? It's going to be a species. So we know tons of species. This is example here is a little puppy, is a little dog. A population. So a population is where we have a group of species that occupy the same environment. So it needs to be 2 or more of the same organism. So we're talking about 4 puppies. We're talking about 7 cats. We're talking about 800 E. coli cells. All these are going to be examples of populations. Step it up one more. A community. A community is where you have 2 or more populations in the same environment. They have to be in the same environment. So this is where you have 2 puppies and 2 kittens together. If you had 1 puppy, so 1 puppy plus 2 kittens, no community. Why? Because this 1 puppy is not a population. Okay? No to the population. It has to be a population. Don't forget, a population is 2 or more of the same. That is the tricker. People usually mix up population, community, and then this next one I'm going to talk about. Population, 2 or more of the same. Community, 2 or more populations. So if you wanted to get technical, you needed to have at least 4 organisms there, right? 2 dogs, pop 1. 2 cats, pop 2. Population 2, population 1. Something like that. All right, in the ecosystem, you take that community, right, the 4 organisms, or it could be more, that's just the bare minimum, and you put it on a physical environment. So how do those puppies and kittens interact on a rock, right? How do beavers and salmon interact in a stream, right? How do mountain lions and trees interact on a side of a mountain, right? All these are going to be examples of ecosystems. And finally, a biosphere is basically where all living things are present. So a great example is Earth. That's the best example we have. So that's going to be what we see there. So again, looking back at this, now you have a little more context. Starting off with atoms, teeny tiny, same element. You take 2 or more atoms, you get a molecule. You take a lot of, more than 1 molecule, you get a macromolecule. Then you're going to have cells, right? It's going to be membrane enclosed. Tissues, which are going to consist of, tissues which are going to consist of the same type of cell, right? The same type of cells that come together form a tissue. An organ is going to be 2 or more tissues. Organism, we know what that is. A population, 2 or more of that organism. A community system is going to be 2 or more populations. An ecosystem is going to be that community plus physical environment. And then a biosphere is essentially, the earth is where all living things are. So you can see that being mirrored in the image. You got your atoms, your molecules, macromolecules, your cells. In this case, you're talking about a heart. You take a lot of those cells together, you form heart tissue. You take multiple tissues, you form an organ. Then it forms an organism. Those organisms are going to come together to form populations. Once we have 2 or more populations, this will form a community. So in this particular case, we're talking about these birds, and even if you want to get technical, these plants, because remember, plants are living things too. Don't forget about plants. they are organisms, so they count. If you're talking about even just the parrots with the trees, that's still a community. And then our ecosystem, once we take all that, how do our parrots interact with this stream? How do the parrots interact with the mountain that's here? All these are going to be different aspects of an ecosystem. And then finally, the earth is your biosphere. So that wraps up what is going to be in part 1 of chapter 1. So please review this. If you have any more questions, let me know and look forward to the next video.